Okay, so we are going to start the lecture with the word salts, right? We are going to start the class with the salt, as we already know what is acid, what is base, what is the chemical properties of acid, what is the chemical properties of base. Now we can easily move towards the topic salts, right? Now, first of all, you all know that what is salt, but definitely this is my duty to tell you the definition again. So what is salt, bacho? We know that salt is a substance which is always ionic compound, right? It is always ionic compound. Salt is always ionic compound. This is the combination of positive and negative. This is the combination of positive and negative. Salt is always ionic compound. हमेशा 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 positive और negative का ये combination होता है. You need to keep remember this बच्चों कि salt हमेशा ionic compound होता है. You can say that it is a combination of cation and anion, right? And if you talk about the basic definition of this, so the basic definition is this: when one or more than one, it is when one or more than one H ion, it is when one or more than one H ion from acids, right? From acids are replaced by metallic ion, replaced by metallic ion or ammonium ion. This is actually the perfect definition for salts, bacho. You need to keep remember that whenever H ions from the acid, just for suppose if you talk about some examples. So if you talk about HCl, you can see this is one of the acid, right? अब इस acid का जो H ion है, if this H ion is replaced by any metal ion, it will form what? Salt. ठीक है ना? This is the definition of salt. जब कभी भी आपके पास किसी भी एसिड का एक H आइन या उससे ज्यादा H आइन किसी भी मेटल आइन से या अमोनियम आइन से, अमोनियम आइन क्या होता है बच्चों? Ammonium ion is always NH plus, right? NH4 plus. So for example, if this H ion is replaced by NH4, so this is also what? The salt form, right? So you need to keep remember whenever H positive ion from acid, one or more than one, are replaced by any metal ion, it is always from what? Salt. And you need to keep remember बच्चों कि आपने जब भी salt बनाना है तो आपने charge को जहन में रखना है. For example, if you talk about the charge of chloride, so it is always -1. We know that it is from group number 7 ना, so it is always -1. So chloride जब sodium से मिलेगा बच्चों तो sodium is from group number 1, so it is +1. When the charges are opposite and the number are same, the formula will be NaCl, right? But if you talk about magnesium, so magnesium is from group number 2, so the charge of magnesium is 2 plus and the chloride is -1, so the numbers are going to be cross multiply when the number are different, right? So it will be magnesium chloride. And for suppose if HCl is like the H from HCl is replaced by aluminum, so aluminum is from group number 3, so the charge on aluminum is 3 plus and chloride is minus, so the numbers are going to be cross multiplied, only the numbers, right? So it will be AlCl3. So you need to keep remember कि आपके पास salt का formula correct होना चाहिए. Salt का formula आपके पास क्या होना चाहिए? Correct होना चाहिए. Is that clear definition to all of you?
सर क्वेश्चन था.
क्या कह रहे बेटे?
सर क्वेश्चन था मेरा.
जी बोले.
सर वो लास्ट टॉपिक में जब हम लोग उसको एसिड को रिएक्ट कराए थे सर कार्बोनेट्स के साथ, सर वो वाला थोड़ा मुझे समझ नहीं आया था, उसको बैलेंस कैसे करते हैं?
ठीक है, कोई मसला नहीं है, हम उसको बैलेंसिंग को अलग से कर लेंगे. फिलहाल तो हम सॉल्ट्स पढ़ लेना, सॉल्ट्स हो जाएगा फिर बैलेंसिंग भी हम कर लेंगे. डोंट वरी अबाउट दैट. आप मुझसे पूछ लीजिएगा क्लास के एंड में रुक के थोड़ी देर, ठीक है?
ओके सर, थैंक यू.
Okay, then even we have sulfuric acid as well. It is also one of the salt, oh sorry, acid. Sulfuric acid, it is also one of the acid. So you can see this, it has 2 H ions, right? It has 2 H ions. When this H ion are replaced by sodium, it can form what? Salt, sodium sulfate, right? Same as it is, for example, this H, for example, these H are going to be replaced by magnesium, so it will form what? Magnesium sulfate. For example, these H's are going to replace by ammonium ion, so it will definitely form what? Ammonium sulfate. So these all are salts. ये सब salt है. ऐसा नहीं है कि सिर्फ NaCl salt होता है, सारे salts होते हैं जब भी एसिड के H replace हो जाए अमोनियम आयन से या मेटालिक आयन से, right? And we know that सल्फेट का चार्ज क्या होता है बच्चों? सल्फेट का चार्ज होता है आपके पास 2 minus, and sodium is +1 because it is from group number 1. So we need to send the numbers over there like this. It will be sodium sulfate. That is why the formula is Na2S4. And if you talk about magnesium sulfate, so magnesium is actually 2 plus and sulfate is actually 2 minus. So when the numbers are same and the charges are opposite, we just combine them. ठीक है ना, इसको हमने combine करके लिखना है, ऐसा मत लिखना आप लोग। ऐसी गलती कर देते हो आप लोग, लिख देते हो इस तरह मैग्नीशियम 2 SO4 2, ये कंप्लीटली रॉन्ग है, ठीक है ना, ये सही नहीं है। यू नीड टू रिमेंबर दिस, जब नंबर आपके पास सेम हो यू जस्ट नीड टू कंबाइन दैम। अगर K लिखा हुआ है आपके पास, K is +1, NO3 is -1, so it is, you can say that the charges are opposite and the numbers are same, you just combine them, KNO3 same as it is। आपके पास लिखा हुआ है कैल्शियम 2 plus, ऑक्सीजन लिखा हुआ है 2 minus, so the numbers are same, you just combine them, कैल्शियम ऑक्साइड। For example, आपके पास लिखा हुआ है like aluminum which is 3 plus and nitrogen is actually 3 minus, so we just need to combine them, AlN3, oh sorry AlN, right? So you need to keep remember बच्चों कि आपने सबसे पहले तो फॉर्मूला सही बनाना सीखना है। You are in O levels and this is the basic need of your syllabus. If you are going to form the compound between two different ions or between two different atoms, you need to remember, you need to form the correct formula of the product. If you are not doing this, that is mean that you are completely wrong in the start. You need to work on your basics, right? सबसे पहले हमें compound का formula सही बनाना है. If you are good enough to form the right compounds, that means you can write any chemical equation. That means you can balance any chemical equation. That means you can do any calculation through the equation. So you need to keep remember बच्चों के formula सबसे पहले सही बनाना है, ठीक है ना? तो इसीलिए मैं थोड़ा सा आपको करके दिखा रहा हूँ ताकि आपको याद रहे कि formula making हमारी perfect होनी चाहिए, ठीक है? Let's move on towards something different. Now, after the definition of salts, that's very important to talk about the solubility, right? This is something that you need to learn. Solubility of salts, right? Which salt is soluble in water and which one is not. It is very, very important for the salts, right? अगर आप बात करते हो salts की, तो उसके salts बनाते वक्त आपको सबसे पहले पता होना चाहिए कि कौन सा salt पानी में soluble है और कौन सा salt पानी में soluble नहीं है। तो उसके लिए आपको ये सारी information याद करना होगी। The first information is that all nitrate salts are soluble in water, right? You need to keep remember this, that all nitrate salts are soluble in water. What I'm trying to say over here, I am trying to say over here that, for example, if you have silver nitrate, so you just need to think about this, that in this salt I have nitrate, right? So that means this is the soluble salt, right? It should soluble in water. जब आप इसके crystals को पानी में डालोगे तो ये dissolve हो जाएंगे, ठीक है? Then for example, if you have lead nitrate, right? So you just need to keep remember that this salt having nitrate, so it is also soluble in water. For example, if you talk about potassium nitrate, so it is soluble in water. If you talk about barium nitrate, so it is soluble in water. So whatever the salt you have, if that salt having nitrate ion, NO3 -1, so it means that salt is soluble in water. Is that clear to every one of you?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so let's move on towards the second one is saying that all chloride salts are soluble in water. All chlorides are soluble in water, and there is exception as well, except two salts, and these two salts are silver chloride and lead chloride. These two salts are insoluble, and the rest of all salts having chloride are soluble in water. So for example, अगर आपके पास बच्चों में कहूँ, you have KCl, you have NCl, you have like you have magnesium chloride, like you have calcium chloride. So these all salts are soluble in water, except these two that are already mentioned in the statement, right? So this one is insoluble, this one is insoluble, and the rest of all having chloride are soluble in water. Is that right, Bacho? So I'm using the red one for the solubility. So you need to keep remember this red one is soluble and the blue one is actually insoluble, right? So the blue one are insoluble and the red one are soluble, right? So let's move on towards the third statement. The third one is saying that all sulfates are soluble in water. All sulfate salts, the salts having SO4 are soluble in water. Again, there are some exceptions as well. And these exceptions are except calcium sulfate, except barium sulfate, and lead sulfate, right? So these three sulfates are insoluble in water and the rest of all are soluble. So if you talk about examples, so in examples, we can say that copper sulfate, it is soluble in water. Magnesium sulfate, it is soluble in water. Sodium sulfate, it is soluble in water. Ammonium sulfate, it is soluble in water. So all the sulfates having SO4 ion over there, the salts having SO4 ions over there are soluble except calcium, barium, and lead. So because they have sulfate ions, they are soluble, right? Only these three are insoluble. There's one, and this one. These are insoluble, right? So let's move on towards the fourth statement. What is the fourth statement is saying? The fourth statement is about carbonates. So all the carbonates, now this is different. All the carbonates, this salt में CO3 होता है. All the carbonates are insoluble. यहाँ ज्यादातर कैसे हैं? Insoluble है. Carbonates mostly पानी के अंदर कैसे होते हैं? Insoluble. And there is the exception of three salts only that are soluble in water. And these are sodium carbonate, which is soluble in water, potassium carbonate, which is soluble in water, and ammonium carbonate, which is soluble in water. Only these three salts of carbonate are soluble, and the rest of all are insoluble. So if you talk about calcium carbonate, it is insoluble. If you talk about copper carbonate, it is insoluble. If you talk about zinc carbonate, it is insoluble. If you talk about lead carbonate, it is insoluble. Right. So they are insoluble. This is insoluble, 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 insoluble. Only three are soluble. This one is soluble, this one is soluble, and this one is soluble. Right, Bacho?
Yes, sir.
Then, Bacho, we have one more new addition in our syllabus, which is about hydroxide. This is the new one in our syllabus, right? So you all need to keep remember this, that all hydroxides are insoluble. All hydroxides are insoluble in water. Except, again, the exception is over there, except sodium hydroxide, potassium hydroxide, and ammonium hydroxide. So these are actually good soluble in water and the rest of all are insoluble, right? और कोई सा hydroxide आपके पास soluble नहीं होता है. And one more important thing about this is you need to keep remember a note: calcium hydroxide and magnesium hydroxide. These two are actually sparingly soluble. Are sparingly soluble. बहुत थोड़े से soluble होते हैं पानी में. Sparingly soluble. बहुत कम. So we cannot take this कि यार ये soluble होते हैं. बहुत कम soluble होते हैं. Sparingly soluble होते हैं. That is why we are not using this in the statement, right? The thing is, there what is you need to keep remember बच्चों, जो हाइड्रोक्साइड पानी में soluble नहीं है, वो हाइड्रोक्साइड होते भी नहीं है, वो ऑक्साइड्स होते हैं, ठीक है ना? अगर कॉपर ऑक्साइड है तो ये पानी में डिसॉल्व नहीं हो रहा, इस वजह से ये हाइड्रोक्साइड नहीं बनाता, ठीक है ना? इसी तरह जिंक ऑक्साइड है, ये पानी में डिसॉल्व नहीं होता, इस वजह से हाइड्रोक्साइड नहीं बनाता, ठीक है ना? सेम एज इट इज वी टॉक अबाउट लाइक अल्मोनियम ऑक्साइड, तो ये पानी में डिसॉल्व नहीं होता, इस वजह से ये हाइड्रोक्साइड नहीं बनाता. फॉर एग्जांपल इफ यू टॉक अबाउट द अदर लाइक फॉर एग्जांपल वी जस्ट टेक इट बैरियम ऑक्साइड, तो ये पानी में डिसॉल्व नहीं होता, इस वजह से ये हाइड्रोक्साइड नहीं बनाता. तो यू कैन इवन राइट द डेफिनेशन ओवर हियर दैट all metal oxides are insoluble. Even write this as well: all metal oxides are insoluble except sodium oxide and potassium oxide. I am not using ammonium over here because it is not a metal oxide. ठीक है, तो ये दोनों सिर्फ पानी में soluble है. सोडियम ऑक्साइड when you dissolve this into the water, तो ये पानी में डिसॉल्व होने के बाद ही बनाता है सोडियम हाइड्रोक्साइड. सेम एज इट इज इफ यू डिसॉल्व K2O into the water, जब ये पानी में डिसॉल्व होगा तभी बनाएगा KOH, राइट. सो जो हाइड्रोक्साइड पानी में सॉल्युबल है, इसका मतलब ये है कि उनके ऑक्साइड थे, पानी में डिसॉल्व हो गए तभी हाइड्रोक्साइड बन गया. और जो डिसॉल्व नहीं हुए, इसका मतलब वो हाइड्रोक्साइड थे ही नहीं. ठीक है बच्चों, इज दैट क्लियर टू ऑल ऑफ यू?
सर हम लोग ये कह सकते हैं कि सिर्फ सोडियम ऑक्साइड और पोटेशियम ऑक्साइड ही हाइड्रोक्साइड हैं, बाकी सारे सिंपल ऑक्साइड्स हैं.
यस, यही बात कहेंगे हम. दैट इज व्हाई आई एम जस्ट क्लियरिंग ओवर देयर दैट ये इनसॉल्युबल है, तो ये पानी में सॉल्युबल हो ही नहीं रहे, तो हाइड्रोक्साइड बनाएंगे भी, बाकी सारे ऑक्साइड्स. ठीक है, ये लिख दिया मैंने नीचे वाली स्टेटमेंट. ठीक है, अलग से नोट बना के मैंने इसको लिख दिया है ताकि आपको याद रहे दिस इज द डिफरेंट थिंग, राइट.
सर ये सारे याद कैसे करेंगे?
ये आप को याद करना पड़ेगा. अब ये आपके पर डिपेंड है, आप कैसे याद करेंगे. मुझे बताया, मैं आप कैसे याद कराऊं. आप इसको 2 दिन रिपीट करो, 3 दिन रिपीट करो, चौथे दिन ये खुद ब खुद ही याद हो जाएगा. ठीक है.
ओके सर.
नाउ वन मोर थिंग बच्चों, अगर हम इसमें से कुछ न्यू स्टेटमेंट्स बनाएं ताकि हमारे एमसीक्यूज इजी हो जाए, तो वो हम कैसे बनाएंगे? बहुत आसान हो जाए ना. हमारे एमसीक्यूज हमारे लिए आसान होने चाहिए, हमारे क्वेश्चन आंसर्स हमारे लिए आसान होने चाहिए. तो इन सारी स्टेटमेंट्स को यूज करते हुए मैं कुछ न्यू स्टेटमेंट्स बनाने जा रहा हूँ. ठीक है ना. वो न्यू स्टेटमेंट कैसे बनेगी? देखें, एक स्टेटमेंट तो आपके पास ये बन सकती है बच्चों, दैट इफ यू फोकस ओवर देयर that all the nitrates are soluble, that means sodium nitrate भी soluble होगा, potassium nitrate भी soluble होगा, ammonium nitrate भी soluble होगा. ठीक है ना. सेम एज इट इज टॉक अबाउट ऑल क्लोराइड, तो यहाँ पर ये तीनों दोबारा सॉल्युबल होंगे. ऑल सल्फेट में ये तीनों यहाँ पर भी सॉल्युबल होंगे. एक्सेप्शन में यहाँ ये तीनों सॉल्युबल है, एक्सेप्शन में यहाँ ये तीनों दोबारा से सॉल्युबल है. सो यू कैन यूज वन मोर डेफिनेशन ओवर देयर, वन मोर स्टेटमेंट ओवर देयर. यू कैन से दैट ऑल द सॉल्ट्स, this is not in the book or in the syllabus, but we can make this for the betterment of our MCQs, and the quick reply in the MCQs is right. So all the salts of sodium, potassium and ammonium are soluble in water, right? So this is a very simple thing, but it is very important, right? जहां कहीं पर भी आपको सोडियम नजर आए, जहां कहीं भी आपको पोटेशियम नजर आए, जहां कहीं भी आपको अमोनियम नजर आए और नाइट्रेट नजर आए, ये चारों जहां नजर आएंगे आप समझ जाएंगे ये पानी के अंदर सॉल्युबल है. इज दैट क्लियर बच्चों? And the one more thing which is need to keep remember by yourself is, you can see this, that if you talk about barium, if you talk about barium or lead, so just look at over here about lead. Lead nitrate is soluble in water, but lead chloride is insoluble, lead sulfate is insoluble, lead carbonate is insoluble, lead oxide even insoluble, right? So you can say that all the salts of lead are insoluble. All the salts of lead are insoluble, only nitrate is soluble. So you can say that only nitrate salt of lead is soluble and the rest of all are insoluble. So it is also one thing which is very important for MCQs. आपको जैसी नजर आए लेड कहीं पर लिखा हुआ, आप समझ जाएंगे ये इनसॉल्युबल होगा अगर वो नाइट्रेट के साथ नहीं लिखा हुआ. तो सिर्फ और सिर्फ लेड नाइट्रेट का सॉल्ट सॉल्युबल होता है, बाकी लेड का हर एक सॉल्ट इनसॉल्युबल होता है. इज दैट क्लियर टू ऑल ऑफ यू?
यस सर.
Yes, sir.
ओके, एवरीवन ऑफ यू, आई जस्ट वांट कि आप इसका एक स्क्रीनशॉट ले लें और इसके स्क्रीनशॉट के साथ हम कुछ स्किल टेस्ट करेंगे. ठीक है ना. तो जस्ट टेक अ स्क्रीनशॉट ऑफ दिस फर्स्ट, फिर मैं आपको कुछ स्किल टेस्ट दूंगा, आपने वो करना है. You can use this screenshot while solving the skill test. आप इसकी एक पिक्चर ले ले पहले. Done every one of you? Yes.
नोट डाउन किए मैं सारे.
क्या कह रहे बेटे?
मैंने सारे नोट डाउन कर लिए.
चलें, ठीक है, that's very good done. Okay, so I am moving towards the skill test, right? We need to test our skills that we are getting the point or not, right? So a skill test. What we need to do, we need to do what? Identify the salt soluble or not? Salt soluble or insoluble? You just need to identify this. You need to write soluble or insoluble in front of the salt, right? So I am writing 10 different salts over there, right? And you just need to identify कि यार ये soluble है या ये insoluble. You just need to write the answer in front of the salt, right? So first of all, for example, I have tungsten nitrate. For example, I have barium chloride. For example, I have lead carbonate. For example, I have sodium phosphate. For example, we have ammonium sulfate. For example, we have lead chloride. For example, we have like we have strontium nitrate, right? For example, we have calcium sulfate. For example, we have zinc carbonate. For example, we have potassium oxide. So you just need to write down in front of the salt that is that soluble or not. Just I am giving you 2 minutes to solve this. Just solve this and send me the answer of this. Okay, so once we are aware about the solubility, so we can even identify the salts are soluble or not. So whenever the salt is soluble, we can use the word aqueous with that in the state symbols. So we actually have two types of salts. Number one, soluble salt. And number two, we have insoluble salt. So we have two types of salts, soluble salt and insoluble salt. Just you need to keep remember, this is a very minor thing if you want to talk about the state symbol. So whenever you talk about the soluble salt, so the state symbol will always use for this is aqueous, AQ. And when we talk about the state symbol of insoluble salts, but so you just need to keep remember, we always need to use the state symbol for this is solid. It is insoluble. Okay, बच्चों? ठीक है बच्चों?
जी सर.
Okay, so if you talk about the soluble salts and the insoluble salts, so we have different methods for the formation of these salts. The first method is known as mixing, by which we can form what? Soluble salt, right? One more method by which we can form soluble salts are titration. So these are the two methods by which we can form soluble salts, and for insoluble salt, we can only use the one method which is known as precipitation method. This is known as precipitation method. And one more very important thing that is the very important thing to keep remember is you can use the acid properties over there in the formation of soluble salts, right? We can use acid properties in the formation of only soluble salts. If you talk about the insoluble salts, you must need to use displacement reaction over there, right? So these are the things that you need to keep remember. And we know that what are the acid properties? We know that when acid reacts with metal, it will form what? Salt. It will form salt and hydrogen gas, right? When we talk about the second property of acid, so whenever acid reacts with any metal carbonate, right, so it will form always what? Salt, carbon dioxide, and water. And we know that when acids reacts with bases, they will form what? They will always form salt and water, right? And this is a neutralization reaction. We can even use alkali over here, right? So these are the three chemical properties that can only be used for the formation of soluble salts. We cannot use the acid properties in the formation of insoluble salts because there are only the useful reaction, which is displacement reaction, right? So you can use salts over there, right? You can mix two salts over there. So this will be the displacement reaction. Just keep this remember, right? Is that clear, Bacho?
So can you explain displacement again?
Displacement is actually the reaction in which the highly reactive displays the less reactive. Now, so it is actually the exchanging of the particles, right? So for example, if you are reacting AgNO3, this is one of the salt with NaCl, right? These are two different salts, right? You just mix the two salts, right? What happened? Silver is less reactive than sodium. Sodium, just you can say that replace silver over there and just send silver over there. So in this way, they just exchange their partners and the salts are forming like this, NaNO3 and silver chloride, right? So this is the displacement reaction, right?
सर आपको इससे पता चला कि ये वाला स्ट्रॉन्ग हाईली रिएक्टिव है.
Yes, for that you can learn the reactivity series. That's not a big deal for you. You can easily learn this. Potassium from group number 1, sodium from group number 1. They are the highly reactive metals because they have only one electron in the outermost shell. So they are highly reactive. Then we talk about the second group members that are calcium and magnesium. After group 1, they have 2 electrons in the outermost shell, so they are more reactive. And after this, we have aluminum, which is the third group member, so it is reactive. Then after that, we have some transition metals, and I just remember these transition metals by the word metal, right? I just remember these 5 metals by the word metal, right? So metal, M for magnesium, A for aluminum, Z for zinc, I for iron, and L for lead. So by this word, you can remember the middle 5 members, and the last one is copper, silver, gold. This is the reactivity series that you need to keep remember. Okay.
ओके सर. सर वो बीच में इंटरनेट से सिग्नल लॉस हो गई थी. मिक्सिंग और टाइट्रेशन आपने क्यों लिखा हुआ है?
Mixing and titration are these two processes by which we can form soluble salt. These are the methods by which you can form salt, right?
ओके सर.
Okay, so these are the things that you need to keep remember. And also one very, very important thing is this, bacho. For example, if you are going to identify the reactants that, for example, आप कोई salt बना रहे हो ना, सबसे पहले what you need to do, बच्चों, you need to find out the solubility. This is the factor that you need to keep remember. For example, I just gave you that you have copper sulfate, right? So what is the first thing that you need to do? What is the first thing that you need to do? The first thing that you need to do is to find out that is that soluble or not. So what about the solubility? Is that salt soluble or not, bacho?
Soluble, sir.
So you can say that, sir, this is soluble, right? This is soluble. So first of all, this is the first thing that you need to identify. Is salt soluble hai ya nahi? Once you got this, is soluble hai, then you need to find out what method. Then you need to find out what method. And for identification of method, you must have what? You must have reactants as well. If you have reactants, you can find out the method. Actually, method is depending on the reactants. So how can we find out the reactants? So this is a soluble salt. Once the salt is soluble, we know that we can use what? Acid properties. We can use acid properties. So this is the first thing that you need to keep remember. कि salt soluble है, तो उसके बाद अगर आपको कोई चीज याद रखनी है, वो आपने याद रखनी है कि acid की properties use होंगी. So you can find out the acid that is going to be used over here by the name of the salt. Just look at over here. What is the anion over there, bacho? It is sulfur, right? So we know that salts are always formed when acid replaces their ions by the metallic ions. So definitely कोई ना कोई acid आपने ऐसा use किया होगा जिसमें आपके पास sulfate होगा. So which acid having sulfate, बच्चों?
H2SO4.
H2SO4. This is the thing that you need to keep remember. सबसे पहले आपको ये याद रखना है कि आपने सॉल्ट को देखकर आइडेंटिफाई करना है सॉल्युबल है या इनसॉल्युबल. अगर वो सॉल्युबल है तो उसके एनाइन को देख के आपने आइडेंटिफाई करना है कि आप कौन सा एसिड यूज करोगे. इज दैट क्लियर बच्चों?
Yes, sir.
So for example, bachcho, if I have a salt like this is the skill test again for you. Skill test number 2 of today's class. This is skill test number 2. What you need to do, you need to identify the acid used over here. Identify the acid used here, if possible, right? If possible. So tell me, if you have potassium nitrate salt, so what will be the acid that you are going to use? For example, if you have like you are going to form calcium chloride, so what will be the acid that you are going to use? For example, if you are going to produce calcium sulfate, so what will be the acid that you are going to use? Okay, so bacho, once we are able to find out one of the reactant, then we can move towards the next thing. We need to find out the second reactant as well. We need to find out the second reactant as well. For this, just come up with the reactivity series again. But so if you talk about the reactivity series, so these three metals are actually least reactive metal. These three are actually least reactive metals, and these three, the starting one, that these three are highly reactive metals. So you can say that the most reactive one. These are most reactive one. And if you talk about this nasal one, so they are actually moderate reactive. They are moderate reactive. Why we are going to talk about this reactivity over here? Because you need to keep remember that the one which is more reactive or the most reactive can even react with cold or hot water. These metals are highly reactive. They can even react with cold water. बर्फ वाले पानी से भी react कर लेते हैं, इतने ज़्यादा reactive होते हैं, right? Even you cannot keep sodium in your hand. It is highly reactive. You cannot keep this in your hand. It will react with the moisture of your hand. So it is highly reactive. And definitely they will react with dilute acids as well, right?
Sir,
And
they can react with steam as well, right?
yes, steam, hot water, right?
Okay.
If you talk about this, so these are only able to react with hot water. They can only react with hot water. They are not able to react with cold water. They can even react with cold water, but it will take time, right? It will take time. That is why we are talking about instant reaction right now. So if you keep iron into the water for so many times, so many days, so many hours, so definitely it will be rust after 2, 3, 5, 6 days, and it will be a long time duration for the reaction. We are not talking about this one. We are talking about like if you add sodium into the water, it will be explosion over there, right? We are talking about the reaction like this. So the moderate one can react with hot water quickly, but they are very slow with cold water, right? Very, very slow. And then they can also react with dilute acids easily. But if you talk about the least reactive one, so they are not going to react with water in any case, and they are also not reacting with acids as well. Is that clear? Is that clear, Bacho?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Let's come up with over here again. If you talk about copper sulfate, I am using the same example, which is copper sulfate over here. We know that first of all, we identify this, that this is a soluble salt. Once we identify this is a soluble salt, we identify this, we can use the acid properties over there, right? And we see that we have sulfate salt, so we can use sulfuric acid over here, right? This is the thing that we did in our mind recently, right, Bacho?
Yes, sir.
Right. So we know that we have three different chemical properties of acids. We know that we have three different chemical properties of acids. We know that acids can react with metals. Acids can react with metal carbonate. Acids can react with
Alkalis.
alkalis or bases as well. We know that that copper oxide is insoluble, so definitely it will not form copper hydroxide. We just have copper oxide, right? So these are the three possibilities to form copper sulfate, right? मेटल से रिएक्ट करा दो, मेटल हाइड्रोक्साइड ओ मेटल ऑक्साइड से या मेटल कार्बोनेट से करा दो, हाइड्रोक्साइड बना नहीं सकता क्योंकि ये इनसॉल्युबल है पानी के अंदर, ठीक है ना? So that is why let's talk about something salt formation. So if I just ask you to write the equation, I know that you all write like this: copper sulfate, hydrogen gas, copper sulfate, carbon dioxide, and water, right? And then copper sulfate and water. I know that you all write equations like this, but I told you earlier over here, if you focus the reactivity series, I told you that the less reactive or the least reactive metals, these are the three metals that are not able to react with even dilute acids, right, Bacho?
Yes, sir.
That means the reaction over here, the reaction number one is not possible. This reaction is not possible. Copper cannot react with dilute acids, right? So this is not possible, right? Is that right, Bacho?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
So we just have two possibilities over there by which we can form salts. We just have two possibilities remain. We can even react sulfuric acid with copper carbonate. It can easily react because it is not metal, it is metal carbonate, so it can react easily. And even we can react sulfuric acid with copper oxide, it can react and form salt and water. That's right. Now let's find out the state symbols of these substances, right? So if we talk about sulfuric acid, it is acid. We know that acids dissolve in water to produce as positive ion, so they are aqueous, right? So acids are aqueous all the time. Then copper carbonate, all the carbonates are insoluble, so this is insoluble. All the oxides, metal oxides are insoluble except sodium, potassium, so they are insoluble. And this is a soluble salt, this is a soluble salt. Water is liquid, and carbon dioxide is gas. Is that right, Bacho?
Yes, sir.
Now the thing to remember, Bacho, is if one of the reactant for the formation of soluble salt, if one of the reactant is soluble and one of the reactant is insoluble, you need to use the method mixing. This is the case that you need to keep. Remember, if you are forming soluble salts, and out of two reactants, reactant one is soluble and one reactant is insoluble, so you must need to use the method mixing. Is that right?
Sir, what is mixing?
Mixing is the method by which you can form soluble salts. You can see this, that we have two methods to form soluble salt. One is mixing and one is titration. So we have two different methods to form soluble salts. So how can we identify our method कौन सा use करना है? So the way to identify is this कि अगर दोनों रिएक्टेंट में से एक रिएक्टेंट सॉल्युबल और एक इनसॉल्युबल हो तो आप कौन सा यूज करते हो? मिक्सिंग. फॉर एग्जांपल, अगर मैं बना रहा होता पोटेशियम सल्फेट, if I were making potassium sulfate, so definitely I use sulfuric acid. मैं क्या करता? Sulfuric acid use करता because it has sulfate ion, so I must use sulfuric acid. And we know that the three chemical properties of acid: metal carbonate, and metal oxide या hydroxide. Potassium oxide is soluble, so definitely it will form hydroxide. So it will form what? Potassium sulfate and hydrogen gas. It will form what? Potassium sulfate and carbon dioxide and water. It will form what? It will form potassium sulfate and water, right? These are the reactions for the balancing. I'm writing two over here and two over here, right? But again, if you talk about the reactivity series, you just look at over here the reactivity series. The upper three elements are highly reactive metals. These are highly reactive metals. You just think about this कि एक मेटल ऐसा है जो ठंडे पानी से रिएक्ट कर रहा है, एक मेटल ऐसा है कि आप उसको अपने हाथ में नहीं रख सकते हो, वो आपके मॉइस्चर से रिएक्ट कर रहा है. सो जब वो इतना रिएक्टिव है कि वो ठंडे पानी से रिएक्ट कर सकता है, वो गर्म पानी से रिएक्ट कर सकता होगा, तो कितना इंटेंसिटी होगी उस रिएक्शन की. जब गर्म पानी से रिएक्शन कराओगे तो इंटेंसिटी कितनी होगी, और जब एसिड में डाल दोगे तो रिएक्शन की इंटेंसिटी कितनी हाई हो जाएगी, आप बर्दाश्त ही नहीं कर पाओगे, वो धमाका हो जाएगा वहां पर. ठीक है ना? तो लैब के अंदर कभी भी इस तरह की केमिकल रिएक्शन हम नहीं करते जो कि एक्सप्लोसिव्स हो. ठीक है ना? आप लोगों के लिए नुकसानदेह हो सकते हैं, इस वजह से हम ऐसा कोई रिएक्शन लैब में यूज नहीं करते. तो ना तो लेस रिएक्टिव और ना ही हाईली रिएक्टिव आप रिएक्शन कर सकते हो लैब में डाइल्यूट एसिड के साथ. सो दिस इज आल्सो नॉट अलाउड टू यूज, राइट? So we can use only these two methods. So we know that it is aqueous, it is all the salts of potassium are soluble. Aqueous, this is aqueous, this is liquid, this is gas, and this is liquid. So over here we need to use what? Titration method. So this is the difference between the two methods. If you are forming soluble salt, both the reactants are soluble. अगर दोनों reactants आपके पास कैसे हों? Soluble. अगर दोनों reactants आपके पास कैसे हों बच्चों? Soluble. So you need to use titration. और अगर एक soluble और एक insoluble होगा तो आप कौन सा यूज करोगे बच्चों? Mixing यूज करोगे. Is that clear to all of you?
Yes, sir.
दोनों कौन से बनेंगे?
क्या कह रहे बेटो? क्या कह रहे हो?
सर रिएक्टेंट्स कौन से होंगे इनके अंदर?
Test.
सर आवाज अभी आ रही है आपको?
ये आ रही है।
जो मैं कह रहा हूँ रिएक्टेंट्स कौन से होंगे इन दोनों, ये मतलब दो रिएक्टेंट्स कौन से होंगे K2SO4 की इक्वेशन के अंदर?
बेटा रिएक्टेंट लेफ्ट हैंड साइड वाले होते हैं ना, रिएक्टेंट होते हैं लेफ्ट हैंड साइड वाले जो रिएक्ट कर प्रोडक्ट बना रहे हैं। तो सल्फ्यूरिक एसिड और पोटेशियम कार्बोनेट रिएक्टेंट है, लेफ्ट हैंड साइड वाले जो है एरो के टेल से पहले जो लिखे हुए हैं ना वो रिएक्टेंट होते हैं, राइट हैंड साइड वाली तो प्रोडक्ट होती है ना।
तो सर इसमें अगर दोनों सॉल्युबल हैं तो फिर टाइट्रेशन होगा, इसमें है दोनों सॉल्युबल।
यस, दोनों सॉल्युबल तो टाइट्रेशन, एक सॉल्युबल और एक इनसॉल्युबल तो मिक्सिंग। ठीक है,
ओके।
इज दैट क्लियर एवरी वन ऑफ यू?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so this is the thing which is actually the start